Are you about to create an InDesign document and you don't know where to start? Work smarter, not harder with my 10-step pre-start design document checklist that can help you to set up your design documents correctly to avoid costly and embarrassing mistakes down the line. Let's get going. If you don't have your design documents set up correctly from the beginning, you can run into a few different kinds of mistakes. You might have your document set up at the wrong size. You could potentially be using the incorrect color space. You might not know what you need to do as far as printers bleed, crop marks, margins, whether or not your document needs to be set up as single pages or facing pages. You could potentially end up having your files rejected if they're not set up correctly. And let me just say, it's pretty embarrassing if you're offloading a file to a client and they're sending it away to someone else to print and that printer rejects your file. It just reflects badly on you as a designer when your client has to come back to you and ask you to fix a file that you should have had correct in the first place. So let's jump into the 10 steps so that at the end of our document setup, we know that we've got everything we need for success. Number one, what are we going to create? Are we creating a document for digital use? That could be website graphics, digital advertising, ebooks, anything that doesn't need to be printed, something that your end viewer is going to be looking at on a screen? Or are you setting up a document for print? So that could be stationery, visual communication like brochures, signage, point of sale displays, magazines, books, booklets, labels, anything that could be printed really. So there's sort of two categories, print or digital. Which one does your document fit? Number two, who is the audience or recipient of this document? Who are you creating the document for basically? If you're working for a client, your client's making a piece of visual communication, you're designing it, who is it going to be for? Like, who is their customer? Number three, distribution. What are the customer touch points where they're going to come into contact with this piece of visual communication? So that audience that we identified in question 2, how are they going to come into contact with this document? Is it going to be a digital download? Are they at a trade show and they've picked up a handout? Are they in a networking event where they're being handed something personally? Is it something they're going to find in their letterbox, in the post, on a table at a local store? Is it a poster in a window? Are they going to see it online? Is it in a marketplace scenario? Is it a magazine or an advert? What are they going to be doing at the time when they see this piece of visual communication? And number 4 kind of goes together with number 3. Does it need to fit into something? Like, is this something that needs to fit inside an envelope? Is it a brochure that needs to fit inside a brochure holder? So when you're visualizing where the end place is going to be, sometimes this is a question you need to ask your client. Like, if you're designing a brochure, is it going to be handed to customers? Is it going to be in a brochure holder? Or is it going to be in an envelope that they post out? What does it need to fit into? This question is more to gauge like a final size or a limit on the final size so that we know what we create is going to fit where it needs to go in the end. Number 5, what is the purpose or the main message of this document? This isn't important as far as the size and specs information that you need when you're starting your InDesign document per se, but it's more to help keep you on track with how you're designing your document, or to help keep your customer or your client on track if they're supplying content for you to include in your document. So everything that you include in your design needs to support the main purpose or message of the document. Some purposes or messages of documents might be, it might be a particular campaign, it might have a particular campaign message. It could be something that just is there to create brand awareness in general. It might be a lead generation tool, or simply a product catalog that shows products and services of your client. There's many different reasons why you would create a piece of visual communication, but it's important to ask the question what the purpose is, because then you can help keep everything on track with the way you design your document. Number 6, what is the size of your document? Number 7, how many pages is your document going to be? Now, if you're creating a digital document, it doesn't really matter how many pages that your document is. If it's something like an ebook or something like that, you can just continue to add pages or remove pages in your InDesign document and therefore your final output PDF or however you're making it, and it doesn't really affect anything. If you're going to print a multi-page document, it becomes really important how many pages that you're going to include, because the more pages that you have, the more expensive your print job is going to be. So when you add or subtract pages, it's going to affect the final print cost for you or your client. So it's pretty important to set up from the get-go how many pages you're intending your document to be. And also, if it's going to be a multi-page booklet that has a fold or a bind in the middle, you might need to set up your document with facing pages, so you have a left page and a right page. If you're setting up a document for digital, you can just have pages running consecutively below each other. They don't need to have a left and a right because they're never going to be printed like that. Number 8, who is going to be executing from your final artwork or your final document, and do you have their specs? If you don't know what specs are, then you don't have them. No, if you're creating something that's like a digital ad for a web banner or a online publication, that publication or advertiser will give you specific pixel sizes and an RGB color space of which to set up your file, and they will tell you whether they want a JPEG or a GIF or a GIF or a PNG or a PDF. If you're setting up a file for print, you need to speak to the printer who is going to be printing your document, or asking your client to supply that printer's specs. Now, that printer might want to have your artwork with crop marks. They might ask you to supply your document with bleed. You might also need to be supplying a document with a Pantone spot color and how they want that set up. If you're supplying a document that needs foil or spot UV varnish or a special effect or an emboss, then you'll need to ask your final printer how they want that part of the document set up. So not every printer is exactly the same. It's really important to ask them how they want their file set up, especially when you're doing booklets, how much bleed they want, what the inside margin needs to be. There's quite a few different requirements that printers will have. And another thing is, if you're setting up a file for packaging, your printer will have a die line and they should be able to supply that to you, and your artwork needs to fall within the shape of their die line. So speak to your printer before you start, get all the specs together so that when you come to outputting your final file, there's no questions about what they want, and you'll look like an absolute hero when you supply them the file to their specifications. Number 9, do you have all the assets to start your document? When we're talking about assets, that could be the text that needs to be included, the headline, any contact information or calls to action that you need to include in your document. Do you have all of the images? If you're setting it up for another brand, do you have the logo? Have they supplied you with a style guide so you know what fonts you need to be using? Do they have any other brand assets or imagery that needs to be included in your document? And then number 10, housekeeping. Have you got your file set up? Where are you going to save things on your computer? You don't want to be that person that saves every design file onto their desktop InDesign untitled.indd number 1, or that gets out of hand really quickly. We need to have a smart way of keeping our documents together so that you have your InDesign document and a space near your InDesign document to have the images, links and assets and everything that you've been supplied. This might be helpful for you to see so that you can mimic it. You don't have to save your files onto your machine. You might have a space in, say, your Adobe Cloud or Dropbox or Google Drive or something like that where you're saving your files online, which is totally fine. Here's a little screenshot of how I set up my files. So in my work in progress documents, I always have a master file, and I can just copy and paste this as many times as I need to for each project. So each project has this layout, and I'll obviously label it by the name of the project or by job number or something like that. So inside my folder, I have a supplied folder. Now this is where I put all of the stuff that the client sends me or that I have to start my job. So that would be communications, text files, tables, raw files, those kinds of things. And then when I decide which of those files are actually going to be part of my InDesign document, like images, logos, those kinds of things, I will copy them into my links folder, which is inside my working folder. Now, just inside my working folder, I will always keep my native InDesign file in there. If I create a draft, I remove it out of there and I put it into, say, like a previous file or a proofs file. And I will always just keep one InDesign document in my working folder. That is the one document that is the main master file. If you save things in like draft 1, draft 2, draft 3, draft 4, it gets really confusing, which file to open next time you're in there. So I like to just keep one main InDesign file, like the main file that I'm working on, and anything else gets, distributed out into like the supply or the previous folders. I've got a draft proof form in the proofs folder so that every time I send a draft to a client, I can send it with my own branding on there. And then the output file, the only file that I put in my output folder is the final file that is created. So if that's an ebook or a digital file or an ad, that's just the one document in there. Or if it's a print file, it is the final print PDF, no drafts, no proofs, only the final thing. So if, for example, down the track, the client says, hey, I want to do a reprint of this job, I know exactly where I need to go to get just the file that we need without having to sift through drafts and those kinds of things. Okay, go to that job folder. In the output file, there's only one file, there's no choices. Removing the chance of errors, basically. So yeah. Hey, if you're finding this content valuable, please subscribe to my channel so you can follow along with the next video. So just a little bonus question after running through those 10 checkpoints. Is InDesign still the correct app for you for this project? If you've run through all of those questions and you realize that you're going to be combining a mixture of text, vector graphics, and images, then you've definitely come to the right place with Adobe InDesign. If it's something that needs to be created out of vectors and requires a die line like packaging or signage, perhaps you might want to go over to Illustrator and complete your project in Illustrator. Okay, now that we've gone through our checklist, you can follow along with me as we start our very first InDesign document in the next video. So I'll lead you through setting up this InDesign document step by step after going through that checklist. And if you'd like a copy of the checklist, check out the description below. I'm going to leave a link down there so you can download the PDF and go through it before you start your project with me in the next video.